us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. So there was this one little boy who wanted $100, and he prayed and prayed for 2 weeks, but nothing happened. Then he decided to write a letter to God requesting the money, the $100. When the post office received the letter addressed to God, USA, they didn't know what to do with it. So they sent it to the president at the White House. The president was so impressed, he instructed his secretary to send the boy a $5 bill. That should look like a large sum of money to one so young. The boy was delighted with the $5 and immediately sat down to write a thank you note to God, which read, "Dear God, thank you for sending me the money. However, I noticed that for some reason you had it sent through Washington, D.C. And as usual, the government deducted 95%. I just made that story up, by the way. We're doing, I'm going through a series of messages for Advent, and I'm kind of basing it on a conspiracy that's out there. If you type into your Google Advent conspiracy, you can go to this website that talks about this idea that as Christians, we should have a different mindset and a different way of looking at things than the rest of the world does.
That's right.
And that's what we should do. And so there's 4 categories in which they talk, and they are worship fully, spend less, give more, love all. And those are the kinds of things that I'm going to be talking about, which means that we're in the second week of Advent. So giving is the topic for today. And nope, we locked the doors. You can't get out before we start talking about money. And it's the whole idea of spend less. And you think, well, spend less, okay, that's kind of a nice idea. But the reality is that idea is, if you take that attitude of spending less, you really are being on the rebellious side in terms of the culture. As I was reading some things this last week, I came across the report on how much money was spent last weekend, Black Friday, Cyber Monday. So, on Black Friday, consumers spent, look at those zeros, right?
Wow.
That's, by the way, that's not million, that's billion. 10,800 million on Black Friday, one day. And on Monday, one day, there was 13 million, or billion, 200 million. Now, the other thing that's interesting about that is you think that's a lot of money, right? But this is the kind of the catch to that is, this is only online purchases.
Yeah.
This is not things bought in a store. This isn't money spent at restaurants. This isn't money that is spent. I could have added another line about how much people spent going to the movies that weekend. But that's not included in this. This is just money that was spent through the computer to lots of corporations who at the end of the day really don't need their money. But we spy all this stuff. So that's not, the idea of spending less then is looking at numbers like that and saying, well, what are we doing? Why are we spending billions of dollars just because it's Black Friday or because it's Cyber Monday? And this isn't, the other thing that was interesting was that Thanksgiving Day, the day before Black Friday, $6 billion was spent online. And it just keeps going. The numbers just are astronomical. This is the United States too. This is the world. This is just in our country. Now Where we really get into issues, I think, is that, see the little percentages there? It says it's up 10% from last year, and then up 6%. That's really what drives our economy. Our economy is really driven on the fact that we spend more this year than we did last year. And that next year, we need to spend more. All you have to do is watch TV with commercials for just 20 minutes, and you will be bombarded with people telling you you need to spend more money. You need to buy more stuff. In fact, sometimes our politicians even would argue that if we're not buying stuff, we're going to crash our economy, or we're going to have all kinds of problems. The message out there is, buy more stuff. You deserve this. You need this. Look at these beautiful people on this commercial, and they're so happy. You want to be like them, right? Buy my stuff that I'm offering to you. And so this is the conspiracy that we're talking about. This is the idea that as Christians, we need to stop for a second and ask ourselves, what are we spending on? What are we buying? And do we really need to do all of this? So, where are we going to start with all this? There's got to be something in the Bible about this, right?
Right.
So let's start with Exodus chapter 20. And you're thinking, Exodus?
Exodus.
What's in Exodus? Exodus 20, verse 17, is actually what we would call the 10th commandment. The 10th commandment. You guys know there's 10 commandments, right?
Right.
Yeah. And if we listed the ones that everybody knows, this is probably the one that most people would not be able to get. Right? So there it is. Exodus 20, verse 17, and it says, you shall not covet. What are we doing on Black Friday and on Cyber Monday? By the way, one of the things that was interesting, I worked, as you may know, if you've been here attending for a few years, before I was a pastor here, I worked for you probably heard of the corporation. It's called Walmart. Some people have heard of it. I worked some Black Fridays when people had to come in, and I talked to people. Do you know that most people on that day are not buying gifts for other people? They're buying stuff for themselves.
Right.
And this is the idea behind it. This is what when we look at this commandment, this is the idea. Why are we doing that? Because we want more stuff. It'd be easy to blame the advertisers, the government, the companies that are doing this. But the reality is that we do this because we just want more stuff. We want more clothes. We want more cars. We want more. And I'm not looking at anybody in particular because I buy stuff too. And there's a lot of times when I buy stuff, and the reality is, do I really need this? Well, yeah, because it's 2 inches bigger than my old TV. So I need this. I'm getting old, and I can't see as well. I need a bigger television, right? But that's how we justify it. But then we read these things. It says, you shall not covet, and it says your neighbor's house. You shall not covet. So the focus here is not so much what we are spending on, but the idea that a lot of what we do has to do with the fact that we're trying to keep up with the Joneses, right? My neighbor has something, so I need that. Now, the really difficult thing when you look at this commandment is that there's kind of underneath it all is I want what my neighbor has so that they won't have it anymore. Now that's an aspect of this commandment that we're not going to really talk that much about. Instead, we're going to just talk about coveting and what it is about this world that makes us want so much more. Particularly when I'm sitting there telling all this stuff, and there's lots of heads out there going, oh yeah, this is me. I see me right there. That's what I do. So, and then we have there's a little bit of a, I don't know how to put this, confusion here. Because there are some things that we should covet. That's kind of the interesting thing. We're going to turn to Isaiah chapter 55. And this is something where God is speaking to his people, and he says this about his people. And he says, "Come, all you who are thirsty, come to the waters. And you who have no money, come, buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without cost. Why spend money on what is not bread, while you labor on what does not satisfy? Listen to me and eat what is good, and you will delight in the richest of fare." So there's a certain amount of idea that the problem isn't so much that we covet the things of this world. The problem is we don't covet the things of God. God is in heaven saying, look, if you really want to desire something, desire the things that I'm offering to you. Thirsty and talking about bread. You know two common things what Jesus says when he's in this world, when he's talking to people? He says, I'm the living water. Come get that. I'm the bread of life. I suppose you could say that Jesus knew Isaiah 55. And he was saying, this is me. I'm the one who quenches your thirst. I'm the one who feeds you. I'm the one. Come to me and to get all of this stuff. But in our world and in our flesh, we look to the things of this world for satisfaction. We look to the things of this world. And Jesus is constantly saying to people, no, that's the wrong place to look for satisfaction. It's the wrong place to have your desires fulfilled. Come to me, and I will fulfill those things. And the interesting thing is that he's talking to God's people. There's lots of studies out there that show that, generally speaking, people in the church aren't any real different in their attitudes than people outside the church. I don't know why that is, except that we're all sinners. The difference between me and them is that I'm saved by grace, saved by God's love. But it's easy for us to fall back into those traps of looking for other things to satisfy us, to give us something good. So, from Isaiah, this is where I'm going to start with, is how we use our treasure on earth shows what we think is really important. God has provided you with the finances that you have. He's provided you with the resources that you have. So the question is, what are you doing with those? How are you using those? And the answer is, well, I'm getting a bigger television. I'm spending more money. And the idea of the conspiracy that we're talking about is that we back off from that. Of course, you're going to get criticized. Why? Don't you want to support the economy? Don't you want the country to be great again? Don't you want us to grow? Well, yeah, so spend money. Why aren't you buying more stuff? But that's not what you're supposed to do. So other people say that. Now, I'm not telling you to do that. I'm saying other people are going to say that. But that's the picture that we have here then, is this idea of using earthly wealth for this. So we're going to turn to something else, something that Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6, starting in verse 19. The difference between using treasure on earth and treasure in heaven. It says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So we go back to the commandment about thou shalt not covet, and then we read Isaiah, and then we come to Jesus' words, and you realize that picture is, what is it that I want in life? And Jesus says, you want to be able to store up treasures in heaven. You want to be doing things that heaven approves of, that God approves of. Now, still doesn't really kind of answer the question then, but so what does that look like in our lives? What is it that we are supposed to do that? Write a check to the church, say for the pastor, and put it in the offering plate, right? I will sacrifice myself. You can give all your money to me, and then you'll be better off, because No, that's not what we're talking about. I looked around through the New Testament particularly, and I looked for that phrase, treasures in heaven, or storing up treasures, something like that. And I found this passage in 1 Timothy, where he's talking to rich people, so, that puts all. One of the things that I want to make clear to everybody in this room is that in terms of the world, we're all rich.
Right.
So whenever it talks about rich people, that's you and me. The poorest of us here are still richer than a lot of people in this world. So in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17, it says, command. Oh, I could just stop right there and just say, look what it doesn't say encourage, it doesn't say exhort, it says command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasures for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. How do you store up treasures in heaven? And he says, and Paul says to Timothy here, you do that in various ways. Do good. Do good deeds. Be generous. Willing to share. So there's this, and he even really starts off with arguing in verse 17 about command them not to be arrogant, which is one of those things like, there's some things in life, or sometimes the Bible commands us to do something, and you have to stop and go, okay, well exactly, what is it? How do I do that? Right? Command them not to be arrogant.
Right.
So quit being so prideful. Quit being so arrogant. Okay? What is that? How do I do that? And put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain. A lot of the arrogance is that we really do believe that all the things that we've been given in our lives, all the resources we've got, all the money that we've got, that we did that. I did that. That's what arrogance here means. I'm the one who made all this money. I'm the one who got this job. I'm the one who, and so therefore I'm in control of all of this stuff. And God continually just kind of nudges us and says, well, what about me? Did I have any part in this? Are you going to acknowledge anything about that? Or so you have this arrogance of just really thinking that it's all me. I've done this. Therefore, I can spend it any way I want. I can spend it all on myself. I can do whatever I want with this, and continually coming back to the idea that, no, God is the one who did that for you. And we need to acknowledge God's role in all of those things. There's a quote from C.S. Lewis, and I got a lot of quotes that I need to get into sermons. So I thought this would be a good spot for this one. C.S. Lewis was talking about the opposite of arrogance, which is humility, right? So humility is not thinking less about ourselves, but thinking about ourselves less. And that's kind of that kind of sums up all these verses. We're going to kind of unpack a little bit more of it. But that sums it up. It's the idea that it's not about me. Everything's not about me. It's about what I can do for other people. What can I do for them? What can I do to help them? What can I do to be a part of their life? And it's interesting that the way you store up treasures in heaven is to take the treasures of this earth and give it away. That doesn't make any sense, right? How do I store up this? If I don't have it, how can I store it up? And the answer is God is putting it in heaven. God is doing that. He is giving those, He's preparing those treasures so that when we get there, we're prepared for that. So, we're going to start off by saying we store up treasure in heaven by trusting God. The word hope is used there by Paul to Timothy. Don't hope in wealth. Instead, put your hope in God. Well, in this case, that word hope and the word trust are really the same thing. If I give away the things of this world, I do that because I'm confident that God will, in fact, take care of me. That's the end of the verse. So that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. If you're really sharing what you have with other people, then God will take care of you. That's the promise. That's what God said. Oh, well, I make sure I keep some of it in my bank account just to make sure that, God might have fallen asleep this month. And maybe I won't have enough for my rent. No, God says, no, you don't worry about it. I will take care of you. That's ultimately what we mean by trusting in God. I can follow God's commands that he's talking about here, and if I do, God will take care of me. It will happen. And that's what trusting God is all about. In Philippians chapter 4, and Paul, the same guy that wrote to Timothy, he writes this about his own attitude towards the things of this world. And he says in verse 11, I am not saying this because I am in need. He's actually thanking them for some gifts that they had sent him, some money. I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. That last verse, by the way, is one of the most quoted verses in the Bible. But notice what he's saying. How can I be content in whatever situation I'm in? Because God will provide me the strength to do that. God will provide what I need. That's what I can do all this means. I can do the things that God commands me because I trust God to provide for me whatever it is that I'm doing. I can not covet. Why? Because God gives me the strength to do that. I just have to follow through with what God is saying. So when we store up treasure in heaven by trusting God, we're really saying to God, I believe, God, that you can do what you promised to do, and you will do these things in my life. I can trust you. I don't have to be like everybody else. I can be what you want me to be. And particularly in this time of year, when we think about what Jesus does by leaving heaven and coming to earth, being born in a stable, the lowest of low, and then coming for the express purpose of giving his life for the rest of us. The God of heaven does that.
Thank you, Jesus.
You and me can give away at least some of our treasure. I'm not asking you to empty your wallets and set everything. I'm just saying we need to spend less, right? Because we don't need that stuff. And we can use that money for something else, for someone else. So, we store up treasure in heaven by trusting God. And secondly, we store up treasure in heaven by doing good. In that Timothy passage, it's almost like it repeats itself. It says, command them to do good, and then it says to be rich in good deeds. The interesting thing is that in English, both of those words good are the same word, is that word good. But in Greek, it's two different words. They're kind of synonyms, but at the same time, the implication is that good is, on one sense, it's sort of the being a good person, that in your heart, you are, in fact, a morally, ethically good person. But then the second one has more to do with the idea that you're actually doing something. It's an action. It's a deed. You're actually, it's not just thinking good thoughts, but actually doing those good thoughts. And that's why it's said twice, and that's why he uses both words. Because he wants to make sure you're not just saying, well, I had good intentions. I'm a good person. You hear that a lot, by the way. I hear that. That's one of those things that I hear sometimes in TV programs or movies, and I joke about this sometimes. And I can remember one, I'm not going to tell you what show it was, but there was a young girl there that was talking about how she just stole something and then she killed somebody, and then the other person, her friend, looks at her and says, yeah, but you're a good person. There's no evidence of it, is there? But we kind of tend to think that, well, no, I had good intentions, or I had good motives, or I really wanted to do something, but then it turns out we didn't really do it. We did the opposite. And that's kind of the picture there. We want to be doing good. We want to be doing good. We want to be doing good both in the sense of being the right kind of person, while at the same time doing the right things, the good things for other people. Jesus talks about this too. And you know, Jesus has stuff about, he says a lot of stuff about stuff. Did you ever notice that? That there's a lot of things in our lives that if we just turn to the words of Jesus, we probably figure out that he just talks a lot about good stuff. Wow, maybe we should just do what he did and do what he tells us to do. Nah, that'll never work. Mark chapter 10, verse 17. It says, as Jesus started on his way, a man ran up to him and fell on his knees before him. Good teacher, he asked. No, good? See the word good? Good teacher, he asked. What must I do to inherit eternal life? Why do you call me good? Jesus answered. No one is good except God alone. You know the commandments. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false testimony. You shall not defraud. Honor. The defraud, that's the covenant part that we read earlier. Honor your father and mother. And interrupts him. He said, teacher, all these I have kept since I was a boy. That's me. I've done all those good deeds. Jesus, the reason why I read the story of Mark is because of this next line. Jesus looked at him and loved him. Mark's the only one who says that. The other Gospels don't. One thing you got, he said, go sell everything you have and give it to the poor. And you will have, and there's the phrase, treasure in heaven. How do you store treasure in heaven? Give away the stuff you have in this world. Then come, follow me. At this, the man's face fell. He went away sad because he had great wealth. Jesus looked around and said to his disciples, how hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom of God. You have to give this life up to be a follower of Jesus. I can't add anything to that. It's something that we all have to wrestle with. We all have to say, to be good, to do good, we have to be willing to give up the things of this world in order to do that. Jesus says that's the goal, to store up treasures in heaven. Not to store up treasures here. We like to look at ourselves and say, well, yeah, I've kept all the commandments. I didn't kill anybody this week that I know of. I didn't steal much. I was mostly honest. I mean, that's usually what we say, right?
Right.
That's the way it ends up being. If we actually look back at our life, we realize, well, yeah, I did kind of steal that, and maybe I did there was a little bit of a falsehood right there, and anyway, you guys know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
We store up treasure in heaven by doing good. And this person, Jesus could have just said, hey, great, you're following the commandments. Hey, you came to me for the answers. And now that's all good. Just go on your way, you're doing good, you're doing fine. But then he points out this flaw in the thinking.
Yeah.
Right? By the way, now it's a rabbit trail, we're not going to go down that way. Yes, we are. We're going to talk about, because in the story of Luke tells this story, but right before this, he tells another story about a guy named Zacchaeus. Remember Zacchaeus? You know what Zacchaeus does at this point in the story, in his story? He starts giving away his stuff. That's an interesting thing that people don't really realize, because we look at this and we want to say, oh, well, God doesn't actually want us to do that. We just need to want to do it. Or we just need to be willing to do it. But the interesting thing is that God, or Jesus, apparently told Zacchaeus the same thing. And the difference is, Zacchaeus started doing it. He started giving the money back and giving money away. And so I don't think that Jesus is saying here, well, just be willing to do it. Just hold your stuff lightly. when he told the guy to give themselves, he meant it. I know that's an odd concept, but that's Jesus does things like that. He says very uncomfortable things. It's almost like a conspiracy that he has against people. Almost. So we store up treasure in heaven by doing good. We store up treasure in heaven by trusting God. And third, according to Timothy, we store up treasure in heaven by being generous. So, in the King James, that verse in Timothy doesn't say generous. It says liberal. Whoa! No, we don't want to do that. We don't want to be liberal. But see, liberal today has a different word, meaning. It has a political connotation. But the idea is to be willing to give to anybody. Yeah. To give it all. To give as much as you can. To be the person that just gives away stuff. By the way, that's the definition of grace. Did you know that? Be a person of grace. Just give stuff away. But what if they don't deserve it? Well, I don't deserve grace from God, so why am I worried about deserving? It's not about them. It's about me. What kind of person am I? In Acts chapter 20, verse 32, this is Paul again talking about his life in Ephesus. But this is what he says. Now I commit you to God and to the word of his grace, which can build you up and give you an inheritance among all those who are sanctified. That's another way of saying treasures in heaven. An inheritance to if you are sanctified. I have not coveted anyone's silver, gold, or clothing. You yourselves know that these hands of mine have supplied my own needs and the needs of my companions. In everything I did, I showed you that by this kind of hard work, we must help the weak, remembering the words the Lord Jesus himself said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. You get blessings, you get treasures in heaven by giving. That's how you do it. It's contrary to what we all think about as blessings. Blessings is me getting what I want. But God says, you know how you get blessed? You give stuff away. You just give it away. You store up treasures in heaven by not buying for yourself, but helping other people. And the standard is so high. I mean, if you're uncomfortable right now and you're thinking, well, Jesus, I know Jesus said all that, but maybe he just meant kind of like that. Just kind of have that attitude. Be a little bit like it. No, it's good to kind of keep moving in that direction because I realize that you can't go from a stop to 100 miles an hour all at once. You got to kind of go with it. But that's the thing about what the Bible says. We look at ourselves and we have kind of a low standard. But God has this standard way up here. And that's the picture that Jesus is constantly saying to his disciples. You think, like that young man, that you're good because you've got to this point. And God says, yeah, but I'm trying to get you to this point. Or maybe even, I'm not tall enough to show the standard. I mean, the standard that God has, and it's not like God is in heaven saying, I'm just going to have to strike you all dead with lightning because none of you are doing. No, what he wants is for us to progress that way, constantly going forward, going up, getting better, more like God, more like Christ. That's the constant picture. And realizing that blessings come when we give. So that's why, again, as your pastor, I'm willing to receive so that you will all be blessed. See how that works? No, that's not how it works, right? Because I don't need those things. But there are people that you know who do. And you can give to them. And giving means just letting them have it. There's a missionary named Jim Elliot who was killed as a very famous, taking the gospel to Brazil. And he has a quote that probably some of you have heard before, but the quote is, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. What can't you keep? Well, according to Jesus, the treasures of this world, moths and vermin eat it, thieves break in and steal. And so you can't keep that. And you can't take it with you. You knew that, right? All the stuff that we're buying, you can't take it with you. It's not like I can put an Amazon sticker on it and send it to heaven and say, so it'll be there when I get there. Can't take it with you. You can't send it on ahead. And so if you use up that to gain treasures in heaven, then you haven't lost anything. In fact, you gained so much, is the idea. I'm going to look at one more little story that Jesus tells. It's I just wanted to read the story just to, hammer the point home. Luke chapter 12, starting in verse 13. Someone else in the crowd comes to Jesus and says, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus, get involved with this. Make sure that I'm getting mine, okay? Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" This is the second little parable or story that we read about Jesus. And both times when somebody comes to Jesus, the first thing Jesus does is challenge their thinking. He doesn't say, I love you, man, and I just want to be here for you. I want to encourage you. And he says to this guy, "Why are you talking to me about this? What are you coming to me for? Are you going to do what I tell you? Are you going to take my advice?" That's the implication of that question. Who made me your judge? Did you? Then you're going to have to do what I tell you. Then Jesus said to them, that's the second thing that Jesus does all the time. You go to Jesus with a question and immediately talks to everybody else about your problem. Then he said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. That's another way of saying God gave him a bunch of stuff. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." And God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God." That second part is the part. You have a lot of stuff? That's not in and of itself, it's not a terrible, horrible thing. But are you rich towards God? Are you using this extra grain to bless other people? Are you using it to store up for yourself treasures in heaven? Are you spending less on yourself and giving more to other people? That's the question. Now I'll let you think about that this week. Let's pray.